I didn't argue when she said it. I nodded, smiled, and told her I understood. Money had always been the excuse, neatly wrapped to look reasonable. One ticket instead of two. One daughter included. One quietly left behind. It wasn't the first time, just the first time it was this clear. I watched the photos arrive while I stayed home, covering responsibilities no one thought to thank me for. I listened to the stories when they returned, the laughter, the souvenirs placed carefully on the table. None meant for me. They spoke as if absence were neutral, as if being excluded didn't leave a mark. But something shifted in me during that silence. I stopped explaining. I started observing. Patterns emerged, along with options I'd never considered before. Legal, precise, unavoidable. They thought the trip ended when they unpacked. It didn't. Because some realizations don't explode. They settle, and then they act. My mother said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. We were standing in her kitchen, the familiar smell of coffee hanging in the air, when she mentioned the trip. A short getaway, somewhere warm. She smiled when she said my sister's name, already imagining the photos, the stories. Then she looked at me and added, almost gently, that they couldn't afford 2 tickets. I nodded. I'd learned how to do that early. Accept explanations without asking follow-up questions. Money had always been the cleanest reason. It made disappointment sound practical, not personal. My sister Lena was younger by 3 years but somehow always first in line. First to be protected. First to be celebrated. She had a way of taking up space without apologizing for it, and my parents admired that. I was the reliable one. The flexible one. The one who would understand. In the days leading up to their departure, I helped prepare things. I drove my mother to pick up travel-sized toiletries. I stayed late one evening to help book a hotel, because she said the website confused her. No one mentioned that I wasn't going. It was treated as settled fact. The morning they left, I stood in the driveway and waved. My sister hugged me tightly and promised to bring something back for me. My mother reminded me to water the plants and check the mail. Practical roles assigned, just like always. Once the house emptied, the quiet felt heavier than usual. My days returned to their normal rhythm. Work, errands, evenings spent catching up on tasks I'd postponed. I covered a shift for a coworker. I helped a neighbor with paperwork. Life didn't stop because I'd been excluded. It rarely did. Photos started arriving on the 3rd day. Beach sunsets. Smiling faces. Plates of food carefully arranged for the camera. I reacted with small hearts, short comments. It was easier than explaining the ache I didn't quite have words for. I wasn't jealous. That wasn't it. I was aware. Awareness sat deeper. I started thinking about other moments, smaller ones. Holidays where my preferences were dismissed as inconvenient. Decisions made on my behalf because I was low maintenance. Times I was told we'd revisit something later, and later never came. When they returned, the house filled with movement and noise again. My sister talked endlessly, her suitcase still half unpacked as she showed me souvenirs. A scarf for my mother. A bottle of something local for my father. She handed me a small keychain and laughed. Saying it reminded her of me, I smiled and thanked her. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in my apartment and replayed the conversation in the kitchen. We can't afford 2 tickets. The words sounded different now, stripped of their kindness. I realized no one had ever asked whether I wanted to go badly enough to make sacrifices. The decision had been made without me. I opened my laptop, intending to distract myself, but instead found myself reviewing old emails, shared responsibilities, things I'd handled quietly over the years. Patterns surfaced slowly, like shapes underwater. I closed the screen and leaned back, a steady calm settling in. Something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that I knew things wouldn't continue the same way. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself at all. The week after they returned, my phone stayed unusually busy. My mother called twice in one day, asking small questions she already knew the answers to. My sister texted links to restaurants she'd discovered on the trip, adding, "We should go together sometime." I replied politely, nothing more. There was a new distance in my responses. Not cold, just measured. I went back to work, where things felt strangely straightforward. Expectations were clear. Effort was acknowledged. When someone needed help, they asked directly, and when I said no, it wasn't taken personally. The contrast followed me home each evening. At dinner one night, my parents talked about finances. My father complained about unexpected expenses. My mother sighed, saying the trip had cost more than planned. I listened quietly, eating slowly, noting how easily numbers entered the conversation now. There was no embarrassment in admitting the strain, only hindsight. That's life, my sister said lightly. You can't plan everything. I looked at her, then at my mother. No one looked back. Later that evening, my mother knocked on my door. She stood there with the same careful expression she used when she wanted something, but didn't want to name it yet. She mentioned a document she couldn't find, a form that needed to be filed soon. She said, "You're better with these things." I told her I'd think about it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Not in anger, surprise. I'd always said yes immediately. Thinking about it was new. That night, I pulled out a folder I kept for practical reasons. Receipts, copies, records. Things I handled because no one else wanted to. As I went through them, I realized how much responsibility had quietly accumulated in my hands over the years. Not because I demanded it, but because I never refused it. I wasn't upset. I was curious. Over the next few days, I stopped anticipating needs. I didn't remind anyone about deadlines. I didn't fix small mistakes before they became visible. I simply waited. The effect was subtle but undeniable. My sister missed a payment and blamed the system. My mother grew flustered over paperwork she'd never learned to manage. Conversations shifted tone. Requests became more direct, less assumed. One evening, my father asked, "Are you upset about the trip?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "I'm just paying attention." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand. Neither did I yet. What I did know was this: the story they told themselves about fairness only worked when I didn't question it. And now, quietly, I was questioning everything. I went to bed that night with an unfamiliar sense of control. Not over them, but over myself. And somewhere beneath that calm, a plan was beginning to take shape. By the second week, the tension had a shape to it. Not arguments, not accusations. Just a low, persistent unease that followed every conversation. My absence from certain roles had started to register. Not emotionally yet, but practically. My mother called again, this time more direct. She needed help sorting out an issue with a service contract. Deadlines were involved. Fees. Consequences if it wasn't handled correctly. She framed it as casual, but I could hear the strain underneath. "I might not be able to," I said calmly. There was a pause long enough to feel. "You always handle these things," she replied. "I know," I said, and left it there. That was the moment I realized how deeply the pattern was embedded. My willingness had been mistaken for obligation. My competence had turned into entitlement. My sister reacted differently. She became defensive, snappier. She joked about me being distant, said I'd changed since the trip. Once, half laughing, she asked if I was jealous. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched. I noticed how often my name came up when something went wrong. How solutions were expected to appear without discussion. How irritation replaced appreciation when they didn't. One afternoon, my father stopped by unexpectedly. He sat across from me, quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother's worried. She thinks you're pulling away." "I am," I replied, not harshly. "Honestly, why now?" he asked. I looked at him and thought about the kitchen conversation, the single ticket, the way decisions had been made around me for years. "Because now I can see it," I said. "And I can't unsee it." He didn't argue. That told me more than any defense would have. That evening, I finally opened the emails I'd been avoiding. Old threads, shared accounts, arrangements that linked my stability to theirs. Everything was legal, transparent, quietly dependent. I hadn't designed it that way, but I had maintained it. I began making small changes, updating access, clarifying roles, redirecting responsibilities back where they belonged. Nothing dramatic, just correct. The next morning, my phone lit up. Confusion first, then concern. My mother asked why certain things no longer worked the way they used to. I explained calmly that I'd stepped back from managing them. That it was time for everyone to handle their own affairs. "This feels sudden," she said. "It isn't," I replied. "It's just visible now." Her voice tightened. "You're doing this because of the trip, aren't you?" I thought about that. About how easy it would be to let her believe that. But the truth was heavier. "I'm doing this because I was never asked," I said. The line went quiet. When we hung up, I felt something close to relief. Not triumph, not revenge. Just alignment. My actions finally matched what I'd felt for years. And as the days passed, it became clear they were starting to understand the difference between having someone in the family and depending on them without ever choosing them first. The conversation that followed didn't happen all at once. It arrived in fragments. Missed calls, carefully worded messages, invitations that suddenly included me by name. The tone had shifted again. Not dismissive this time. Cautious. As if everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing and making whatever this was permanent. My mother asked to meet. Just the two of us. We sat across from each other at a small cafe near her house. She stirred her tea long after the sugar had dissolved. "Finally," she said. She hadn't realized how much pressure I'd been under. That she thought I was fine because I never complained. "I didn't know you felt left out," she said. I met her eyes. "You didn't ask." That landed harder than I expected. She looked down, then nodded slowly. For a moment, I thought an apology might come. Instead, she talked about how difficult things had been financially, how choices had to be made, how she assumed I'd understand. "I always do," I said quietly. "That's the problem." The truth settled between us, heavy and undeniable. She asked what I wanted now. The question was new, unpracticed. "I want decisions to include me," I said. "Not after they're made. Before." She hesitated. Then agreed, quickly, almost too quickly. I recognized the reflex. Promise first, adjust later. I didn't press. In the weeks that followed, things improved on the surface. More invitations, more checking in. But I stayed aware. I helped when asked. I declined when it didn't feel right. I stopped filling gaps no one acknowledged. My sister struggled the most. Without the quiet support system she'd never seen, she grew frustrated. She accused me once of making things complicated. "I'm making them honest," I replied. The final moment of clarity came unexpectedly. A family discussion about another trip. This time, one I was invited to. My mother looked at me and asked, in front of everyone, if the dates worked for me. It was a small thing. But it was public. Intentional. I said yes. Not because I needed the invitation, but because it had been offered properly. As the conversation moved on, I realized something important: the power hadn't come from withholding help or forcing guilt. It came from stepping out of a role I'd never agreed to play. The original injustice hadn't been the vacation. It had been the assumption that I'd always stay behind without being asked. Now, that assumption was gone, and whether they changed completely or not no longer felt like my responsibility. Because this time, when choices were made, I was finally in the room.